Friends, I've been meaning to make this video for a very long time. It's very personal to me. It gets into my journey, and I believe this perspective is very helpful for anyone living in Silicon Valley and the autistic community in general. So let's get into it. When I was 4 years old, I was diagnosed with autism. I was in Belgium at the time, and when I was 10 years old, I was told that I have autism by my dad. And when I was 10 years old, another thing happened. I moved to Silicon Valley that year. And I remember very clearly, I was studying for a test. I was just doing pretty bad in school. I wasn't making many friends. And I was just really struggling. And I think my dad at that time thought it was the best idea to tell me, hey, you have this thing called autism, like you were diagnosed. And I want to talk about this journey of being autistic and having that label put on me from such an early age, especially pertaining to living in Silicon Valley. Because in Silicon Valley, this is a different environment. This is techno-capitalism. This is where a lot of techno-capitalism originates from. And this is kind of techno-capitalism like turned up all the way. And it's not just a very high pressure place for adults, but for kids as well. I mean, people in high schools around me killed themselves every year. And as an autistic person and someone who can feel the energy of a place and, is very sensitive in every interaction, this was very difficult and really sums up the experience of being an autistic person living in this techno-capitalist, neurotypical world. So, just for context, the way my autism shows up is that I'm very sensitive. It can be hard to make eye contact. I definitely had difficulty concentrating in class and just difficulty concentrating on things that I'm forced to pay attention to, especially if I'm fit into a desk and I can't really move around and regulate myself during it. I think that's when my concentration lapses. I can have very fixed interests, very much a hyper-focuser, which I love, but it's not always a good fit for the schooling system. I'm very imaginative and daydreamy, which just meant that I would kind of lose myself a bit, or just lose the task and just kind of go into my own world a bit. And also it would be kind of a form of escape, daydreaming. And as well as another way my autism shows up is that, I can just be very shy, shelled off, and very sensitive, and so just kind of having these walls around me. And Silicon Valley, here's what Silicon Valley is. When I moved to Silicon Valley, immediately I could feel the place was much more academically rigorous than my last school, which was in New Jersey. Grades were discussed a lot more, and kids would kind of compare grades, talk about it after class, and there would just be these example students who just went above and beyond and did all these extracurriculars. And this was something that I just wasn't familiar with. Back where I came from, it was kids were just kind of being kids. And all of a sudden, when I came to Silicon Valley, it was kids were already sort of stacking their resumes from a very early age. The school was also very STEM oriented, as with all schools there. So there's just a heavy emphasis on not the arts, but science, technology, engineering, and math. We even had a class on binary numbers in 5th grade. I mean, they were priming us to work for these tech companies. And there was already a lot of talk of coding and computer science, and it was just very recommended of us. And but the main big thing is that feeling, the energy of the place, which California and the Bay Area is beautiful, but there's just this feeling of being around that sort of society where it feels like a pressure cooker. You can feel it in your shoulders. You can feel the stress and the high expectations and the pressure and the performance anxiety. It's all in the air. And as a sensitive autistic person, I felt this so deeply. And there's so many different things that I think go into Silicon Valley. It kind of tends to have this very hardworking culture, but also a philosophy of mechanistic, materialist, this mechanistic, materialist, atheist outlook on the world, where things like spirituality and philosophy and just like meaning in things, all that stuff is just mind stuff. And what really is true is just matter, and so we should focus on, the material side of things. So that was very much a part of it as well. And I believe, places really carry their own energy, and Silicon Valley, here's another thing, it's built on immigrants. It's a very diverse place, which I really love. And I believe, and I see this in my own family too, there's just something about immigrant families where there's just a bit more of like a survival mechanisms coming online, where people just really need to take care of the money and take care of the resume, and that is always at the highest priority, and relaxation comes after that. And I could just tell in the culture here, as I grew up here, I've spent many years here, there's just this very strong adherence to corporate norms, just being professional and ready to network 24/7. And people aren't really choosing themselves. They're not really being themselves as much. And you don't really get taught to choose yourself or to be yourself in Silicon Valley as well. That sort of thing, getting into art or getting into something, that doesn't have immediate monetary benefit is just kind of discouraged and kind of seen as like, oh, you're really going to spend time on that? It's kind of seen as just this like side hobby that, might give you some joy, but really you should focus on these STEM fields. And yeah, this is a very tough environment to live in, especially as an autistic person, because pretty much when you're diagnosed with autism, it's not something you're like looking to get, like it's not something you chase out for yourself. Pretty much you're being labeled as disordered. You're being labeled as this broken machine. Let's go, think back to the mechanistic worldview. All of us are just these biological machines, and if you're autistic, yeah, your internal system is broken and it needs intervention, and you're falling behind, the regular path of success. And so that was a very hard aspect of being diagnosed with autism. And I think, just being othered from the other students, I was already feeling behind, and then having that label on me was very hard. And till this day, I'm still healing from this trauma. The way it manifests now, this like trauma is, I feel like a lot of constriction in my shoulders and neck, and pressure just in this like back area. And to me it kind of symbolizes like kind of shelling off, kind of like conforming to the norms, and just kind of like having a lot on me and not really knowing how to expand and find my wings in this very high pressure situation. I think it brought a lot of anger and frustration. I think growing up, people were angry and frustrated with me that I wasn't, following along and, going in the straight linear line that they wanted me to. I think I also had a lot of self-frustration and self-hatred just from feeling like I was broken. And then also within me, I still feel kind of like a sadness about like this bleak life, a life that is not really going to lead anywhere. And like best case, I land at a tech company, but even then, just the whole thing, there's a lot of melancholy and bleakness of just, where is this even going? And this is my experience growing up in Silicon Valley as an autistic person. And, it's funny because Silicon Valley is full of neurodivergent people. In fact, some of the most successful people in Silicon Valley are neurodivergent, are autistic. And this gets into the different kinds of autism or the different kinds of neurodiversity. Because if you're very much like a left-brained neurodivergent or left-brained autistic, and things like, computational problems, and like algorithmic thinking, if that's your thing, and you can just do well in those STEM classes, if you can become the next Zuckerberg, everyone, like, there are so many resources out there for you. People will hold your hand and bring you into, wherever you need to go. It's actually great for that. Although that world, has a lot of darkness, so just saying. But if you're a right brain neurodivergent, and you're more of the imaginative and dreamy type, very empathic, very intuitive, very creative, Silicon Valley, and just this whole techno-capitalist system that's taken over the world, it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult. Now, what have I done to take back my power, though, in the midst of all of this? What I've done to take back my power is very much a journey, a soul-searching journey, a spiritual journey. I started meditating, I started practicing breath work, I started focusing on my health, I started turning my attention inward. Usually you're taught to focus outward and make sure that all of this around you is mastered and managed. But I started focusing on this. And the more I looked inward, asked, who am I? What's going on for me right now? I realized that this world is such a mismatch for me, or this Silicon Valley is such a mismatch, and it's nothing to be ashamed about. It's not me. So I really became a truth seeker, a spiritual truth seeker, a philosophy truth seeker, and just seeking truth about every aspect of life. I recently graduated with a master's in psychology. I've gotten very into mental health, very into doing the work. And this work works, people. This work really helps. Just keep working on your healing. This is what I talk about a ton on my channel, but you as an autistic person are sitting on such amazing energy, such amazing potential, and just bliss. Like, I run very happy, naturally. And these are all things that are attainable to you. You just have to sort of let go of your adherence to the machine and really put faith in yourself, trust in yourself. Start choosing you. Start choosing you. That's that lesson. That's today's lesson. That's today's video. I really appreciate you listening all the way through if you did. If not, it's also cool. Please like and subscribe if you resonate with my content. I always really appreciate that. And comment your experiences down below. Do you agree? Have you had similar experiences? Let me know. I'd love to hear them. I'll reply. I'll see them. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I wish you a beautiful rest of the day.